Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. I have Colleen Fitzpatrick. She's the founder of Identifinders International. She's widely recognized as the founder of modern forensic genealogy, which will be really interesting to talk about. So, Colleen, thanks for coming. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, what is forensic genealogy? And then tell me about Identifinders International.
Okay, well, forensic genealogy is, the combination of using genealogy for forensic work. Now, it started out more as a hobby definition, applying, say, scientific ideas to just regular genealogy. But it evolved into real, doing real forensic work using genealogy, that is, for the legal system. My company is called Identifinders International. We're based in Southern California. And basically, we do forensic genealogy. We find people. We find and identify people using DNA and genealogy, genetic genealogy, so to speak.
You find people that are still alive or that have passed away?
Both. I have worked internationally. I've worked in probably 50 countries, not going there, but virtually, and having, let's say, minions in the country working for me. I've worked in 50 countries finding people saying for unclaimed property, or as owners of unclaimed properties or relatives of owners, or in terms of, I've been involved in several fraud cases where I had to track down people who knew somebody. That's what I do. I do find live people. Of course, I've done a lot of John and Jane Does and violent crimes. That's when you do not know who the person is. They may be alive, they may not be alive, but you don't start out knowing, that to begin with.
That's amazing. How did you get into this? This is really interesting.
In 2000, there were some people who came up with the idea of applying DNA to genealogy. And back then, the idea was to use Y DNA, which is passed along the male line of the family, along with the family name. So the idea was to use, DNA, genetic genealogy, to research your family name in the absence of documentation. And this caught on because that's what genealogists do. We research our family name, and this would be a new tool. So I got kind of interested back then, but then around 2011, it occurred to me that the markers that were used by genealogists to, research their names, were much the same markers as the forensic community was using for, getting crime scene Y DNA profiles. So I realized that you could take the forensic Y DNA profile and compare it to the genetic genealogy databases to try and find a last name for an assailant, for a violent criminal. And so I started doing that in about 2011. My first case was a Sarah Yarborough case up in King County, Washington. And that's a very interesting story. But then I just kept working on it. In about 2015 was my first success story, because, if you have, say, Mr. X who's committed a violent crime, you don't know who they are, but you have their Y DNA as produced by the crime lab. And this is similar to an adoptee, a living man who's, doesn't know his biological roots. He gives his Y DNA to the genetic genealogy companies, and he tries to find the last name of his biological father. Well, this is similar, except it's, the Y DNA was derived from a violent crime, but it's the same thing. You don't know who the person is. You don't know who their biological family is, but Y DNA can give you a possible last name for that family. And so cool. 2015, I went, I had done this for several agencies, and then I went to the Phoenix Police Department. I was in Phoenix for a conference, and I went over there, I talked to them about this, and they wound up giving me the Y profile on a cold case they had called the Phoenix Canal murders. This was the murder of two women in separate incidents in 1992 and 93. And it had been almost, 25 years and nothing had come of it. And they had about 2,000, suspects on the list, or people of interest on the list. They gave me the Y profile. I produced the name Miller. I found, I think it was 6 matches in the genetic genealogy databases for their Y DNA profile from the crime scene, and 6 matches to the name Miller. So I turned that in, wasn't thinking about anything. A few days later, I was eating dinner with a friend at a restaurant, and I got a call from a detective at 8:00 at night. So I told her, I'm sorry, I have to take this. And when I took the call, he says, you were right. The name's Miller. And of those 2,000 suspects, you allowed us to narrow it down to 5. And of the 5, there was just one, you just couldn't miss him. So we collected his DNA surreptitiously, and it matched, and that's it. And so when I heard that on the phone, a little funny vignette, it's like I went, oh my God, they caught him. And the whole restaurant turned around to look at me. And I said, no, sorry, wrong number. Oh, sorry. It was it was kind of a breakthrough. That was the first case solved using genetic genealogy.
It's really cool. But this is like a very unusual thing for someone to do. It's really cool you do it, but what got you into it? Like, why were you interested in this? Most people, I think, would be, I don't know if they would be.
Well, you see, I really don't know where creativity comes from. I can't answer that question. It's just when you put, genealogy in the same brain with somebody who likes forensics. I have a hard science background. I'm always kind of interested in trying new things. You just stir that all up and it comes out to be forensic genealogy and, applying Y DNA. And I want to say at that time, I had a lot of hate mail from the genealogy community. It just never stopped. Yeah. And the problem was, they were like, oh my God, Big Brother has my DNA, run for the hills. But I used public data. Everything I used was right online. I applied a little software we had developed to, make the matches and find the matches. But all the data I was using was posted on public websites by the genealogy community. And it was so bizarre. It was so bizarre, this hate reaction. And people were, even the leaders of this community were claiming stuff like, you don't know how many people have been falsely convicted using DNA. Oh my God, now we're in trouble. I said, well,
it's weird.
Name one. And there wasn't any answer to that. But the hate mail continued. And of course, we've gone way beyond that now. Not just Y DNA, but it's called autosomal SNP testing. And it's just like ancestry.com uses, that they don't use Y DNA. It's a kind of test that accesses more than just the male line. It accesses, all the lines of the family, and women can take it too. So it's a much more comprehensive test.
Yeah. Most people's perception is going to be probably from watching TV and, seeing the news. So what's true about what you do, and what's, silly or ridiculous about what's in the news or on TV or on crime shows? Like, what's accurate and what's not, just in a general sense?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you're asking me that question, because I'd like to, correct the record on a number of cases. First of all, you don't solve it after the next commercial. That's called the CSI effect that the forensic community has been kind of trying to, set the record straight for a long time. But even so, to go into that in more depth, even this new kind of way, Golden State Killer-esque way of doing this, it's hard. You see the cases in the news every day. Oh, 28-year-old cold case solved using forensic genealogy. And it makes it look like a hat trick almost. But I want to correct that, because I want to tell you, in my experience, it's not a 5-minute deal or a couple of hour deal. There are cases that have been solved in a very short period of time like that. But on the average, the solve time is 60 days. And on the average, it's only about half the cases that can be solved using forensic genealogy. And that includes those really quick ones. And it also includes some that take a year. So when you see it on the news, it gives you the idea, oh, this is easy. I'll go and do, I can do this too. Or it's really, simple. It's not. It's actually tricky. It's actually, you have to think through it. But most importantly, it takes time. It really takes time.
What are some of the elements of it that make it tricky? Like what's required to say to someone, I want your DNA? What level of proof is required, and what would that look like for, let's say, the police to approach people and say, hey, we think it may be you, we want your DNA?
No, what they do, look, everybody out there must know about CODIS, right? The police have a suspect. They collect his DNA. They get enough evidence that they have a probable cause to go arrest that person. They get a judge to say, please go arrest that guy, or you get a search warrant for his house. When he is arrested, he gives another DNA sample that is recorded, videoed, and then that sample is used in court. That's compared against the CODIS database and used in court. So basically, you get DNA from a criminal, you analyze it and make markers or some profile out of it, and you put it in the CODIS database and you look for matches. And that determines something about your crime scene, whether the guy committed the crime or not. We do the same thing. We get crime, the agency gives us DNA from a crime scene. We do something with it. We develop markers, we develop a profile, and we upload it to the genetic genealogy databases, and we try and find matches that tell something about whether the guy committed the crime or not. It's the same process. We don't go out necessarily and say, hey, everybody, give your DNA. We want to see if, you're related to this violent criminal or not. You use what's already there in the databases. Now, if you need to, let's say the police have, a criminal and he's dead, and they need some way to prove they have the right guy. They may go ask his brother. They may go ask his parents for a DNA sample, right? They can do that. In our world, we can do that too. We can ask a family member. We can ask a first cousin, even second cousin. We can ask for samples. It's called target testing. We can do that. It's not every day, all the time. We just don't issue a call, hey, everybody, give your DNA. We really don't do that. And when you do ask somebody, you want to be real particular and real careful about who you ask. You don't want to startle them. You don't want to upset somebody. You just want to get your job done. You want to get some criminal off the street, or you want to identify a John or Jane Doe. It's the same thing as in the criminal world. in the law enforcement world.
Yeah, I've heard that, obviously getting DNA from people that could be family members, cousins, parents, children, etc., can help you zoom in on someone really quickly. So in terms of forensic genealogy, like who that would be related to someone are useful to get DNA from, and how far out can you go, like second cousins or, multiple generations away?
There's a couple of questions in that same statement. CODIS, when you use the CODIS system, the legal system, the law enforcement system that's been in place for 30 years, it's only good, let's say, if you don't know your criminal or he's dead. It's only good, like you could go to a brother, your mom or dad, very close family members, maybe a sibling. It's good only for very close family members. But in genealogy world, you could go as far out. I've identified fifth cousins. Right now I have a case where I have eighth cousins and ninth cousins, all identified. But the further you go out, the harder it is to tie in that person to who you need to find out about. So genealogy casts a much wider net as terms of who maybe could give you a hint, on who that guy is. It's a much wider net. But keep in mind, it's not the legal system. It's just a lead. It can, even if we come out and we said, oh, we figured it out, it's John Smith from Poughkeepsie. We have to turn that into the agency. And at that point, it's the agency's responsibility to follow the legal procedures to collect that person's DNA or arrest him, whatever the situation may be.
Yeah, I didn't realize you can go so far out. Huh.
Yeah, yep, you can. I have a lot of matches right now. I'm working on a case, and pretty much all of, as you start to connect people in, they all connecting in colonial times in the United States. We have I don't, it's a big puzzle we're putting together.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Do people hire you for more, like prosaic reasons, to research their genealogy? They have those shows like Who Do You Think You Are and that kind of stuff. What is your thought on those shows? They seem to be unbelievably amazing at tracing people back. Are they spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars to help those stars to find their genealogy and only picking the ones that they can actually find results for?
I'm not into that. I try not to do, all the normal genealogy stuff. I'm really, it's sort of not interesting to me after 40 years, or, I'm actually quite good at it. But I do believe that, of course, those production companies have production teams. They have people that they can call at archives, and hire around the world. They have the budget for that. They may have people on the ground in various cities that they know, they're going to need. So I don't know how much the budget is, but of course it's much greater than, say, myself just working on my own or with a few people. And I think they're entertaining. I think it opens up people's eyes on what can be done. I think there's always a fascination for celebrities and the fact that they're normal people too. And grandma and grandpa were, pioneers to the West, just like everyone else's. So I think there's an interest, a time for that. It's very good. It's not particularly what I do, but it's fine. It's enjoyable. It's entertaining.
Yeah. Well, why do you do what you do? There must be, I was expecting you to say like there was some huge seminal event in your life that caused you to work in this area. Like, I think what you do is pretty unusual. At a cocktail party, I'm sure people would love to talk to you, but why do you do what you do?
Well, first, I don't go to a lot of cocktail parties just for that reason, because I don't want to be the center of the party. I want to enjoy the party. I don't want to be the entertainment for the party. But besides that, what I like most is just the human, getting into human nature. Why do people do the things they do? I do want to say I never got interested in this. I was born interested in it. I tell people I really was born in New Orleans, and I grew up around, all four grandparents. I knew them until I was an adult, all four of them. I knew their aunts and uncles.
Wow.
I knew some of their brothers and sisters. I mean, a huge family. So growing up in that environment, not only where it was, but who I grew up around living history. And that now I realize the magnificent gift that was. So, in that regard, I never became interested in this. I was born interested any more than I became female or I became Irish. I was born that way. And so along the way, of course, just being good in science and, studying science and going into physics. And then I have a doctorate in nuclear physics, that wires you to be thinking in a certain logical way. And, you apply that to anything you do. I had a conversation this morning with a friend on how to boil eggs, make hard-boiled eggs. And it was so, kind of everything we tried. It was so technical and so interesting, but, it's who you are and how you solve problems in your life. So you get to genealogy and you say, I have a problem. How do I find that guy's Civil War record? Or how do I figure out who he was that committed that crime? And then you bring all your problem-solving tools that you've learned in life, and that's what happens.
Well, what do you think makes you good at it? What makes you the human bloodhound for forensic genealogy?
That's another good question. I have to say this. What I think is when I go and talk at seminars, sometimes I'm part of other, a catalog of speakers. There are other speakers there that talk about, so many interesting things like electronic surveillance. They talk about fake 911 calls, for example. They talk about stage crime scenes and, many other topics. And I think one of the things is I try and sit in as many of those talks as I can. And because I'm invited to speak, I have access to those talks. I'm a member of the VDOC Society, and I just sat in on a talk on suicide notes, how to tell a fake suicide note from a real one. And, it was forensic linguistics. And it was, unbelievably fascinating. It was so good. And I think we have one coming up on blood splatter interpretation. And so I sit in, what makes me good, I think, is I'm so well-rounded. I try and soak in as much as I can about as many topics as I can, even if it's not directly forensic genealogy. It opens my mind to psychology, or how people act, or how to tell the good stuff from the bad stuff, the true stuff from the false stuff, how to think through. And again, how to think through a problem. I have that technical background, that logical kind of way of analyzing things that also helps. So I think that's it. It's just I'm well-rounded. I've tried to keep that. I speak several languages, so I have no, and that in itself is very good. It bends your mind to think in many different directions, many different interpretations. So I think
do you have is there a case that you can speak about that really was very curious and unusual? And can you talk about what made a breakthrough in the case? Do you have any examples in your head of really memorable ones for yourself?
Well, I told you the Phoenix Canal murders was very interesting because that was out of the blue. Nobody had ever solved a case using forensic genealogy or genetic genealogy before. So that call was the beginning of an era, right? I mean, it was the first case solved using genetic forensic genealogy. And I didn't realize what that would happen after that. But the other case I'd highlight is the Sarah Yarborough case I mentioned as the first case I ever thought to do. That was 2011 in King County. And the reason that also was actually maybe the beginning of the era, because in that case, interesting, I came up with the name Fuller for that assailant who killed Sarah Yarborough. And of course, I am matching the Y DNA profile from the crime scene to the genetic genealogy databases for looking for a name. And I come up with the name Fuller. So there are genealogists in the database who provided that match. And I traced their family to a Robert Fuller in Massachusetts in the 1630s. He was not on the Mayflower, but he was related to the Mayflower people, Fuller. Wow. So here's a very interesting case where we don't know who killed this girl, but we know his genealogy back to the 1600s. Weird.
So, how would you know that without knowing him, though?
Because the genealogist he matched all went back to the Robert Fuller, the same guy. So you have to suppose if I have 6, how many there were, 10, or a group that all went back, all their Y profiles matched, and they all went back to Robert Fuller. The male line of the family was the same guy. It was descendants of that same guy. So our unknown, our Mr. X, had to be a descendant too. You make that assumption because there's so many matches, and he doesn't match anybody else but these Fullers. So, okay, fast forward, the girl who died had a classmate named Elizabeth Fuller. Elizabeth Fuller's was one of 5 daughters. So none of those can be the killer. This suspicion falls on her father, William Fuller. So he goes and he gives his DNA. He was ruled out as the killer. He didn't match CODIS. His DNA did not match the crime scene DNA. He was ruled out as the father of the killer. But it turned out his Y profile matched the killer, and he was descended from Robert Fuller as well. So not only did we have the genealogy of Mr. X, we had a cousin. But we just didn't know how close the cousin could have been 10th cousins. We didn't know.
Oh, you can't tell how close they are in terms of certain similarities?
No, not with the Y DNA. That's carried along the male line intact. You have the same Y DNA as your father does, and his father, and his father, and his father. With
but wouldn't you be able to, once you get within a family, even if it's many generations out, I would think that would really narrow. You could start looking for all the associates of that person in their genealogy, and then see if there's, where does the branch come off to this new person, Well,
you are correct. You could do that, and you could say which Fullers wound up in the Pacific Northwest. And I did that, but unfortunately, Robert Fuller lived in 1630, and that means he's got tens of thousands of Fuller descendants. You cannot trace that huge family. He probably has 10,000 or more males named Fuller that descend from him. So yeah. So anyway, fast forward, we got the case last year, and we wound up using, the big genealogy. I call it the SNP testing genealogy. And we found the man who committed the crime, or he's allegedly committed the crime. His name is Patrick Nicholas. So the first question is, how come he's not named Fuller? And the answer is because his grandfather was adopted. And his grandfather was adopted in Albany, New York, maybe 1910-ish. He was an orphan. He was put on a train, the orphan train, and sent into the Midwest. And the orphan train collected the orphans from New York, put them on a train. And when the train stopped at the station, all the kids would get off the train and the families would come out and pick which ones they wanted. And then the rest of the kids would go to the next stop. And the grandfather was adopted by the Nicholas family. So Mr. X's last name was Nicholas. So the other part is that legally, this man had avoided arrest 3 times. He had committed first-degree rape. He was in prison for first-degree rape in the 80s. But CODIS didn't kick in until about 91, 92. So he wasn't in CODIS, and they should have gone back and collected his DNA anyway for that legal database, and they didn't do it. So this girl was murdered in 91. He would have been caught within the year or two, but it didn't happen. So then he was arrested for molesting his stepdaughters, and the mother would not testify against him. So he pled down, and he didn't have to give his DNA a second time because the lower offense didn't require it. And then the third time, his brother was arrested for first-degree rape, and the brother was in prison. Now, Washington State is not a familial search state. So that means they can't use the brother's DNA to search for near relatives. So he got off a third time.
Wow.
You got that? So finally, genealogy, we proved it. We did it, but it had a lot of legal consequences and it had a lot of loopholes in the genealogy as well.
Hey, this brings up a question. If someone uses 23andMe or Ancestry or one of these services, is their DNA subpoenaable without their consent?
No, it is not. 23andMe, Ancestry, those companies do not do forensics at all. And Ancestry.com, if you go to their website, they explain how many subpoenas I think subpoena is the word, they have fought off during that year for their data. They will.
Okay.
They'll give in if it's a credit card problem, something like that. They'll cooperate, but not for their data. And so the only way that law enforcement will ever use your data is that your data belongs to you. You can download it from, say, Ancestry, and you can upload it to GEDmatch, which is a third-party website not associated with any of the companies. And it's like a watering hole for genealogists to do their work. So if I test with Ancestry and I'm stuck in Ancestry, I can't see 23andMe matches unless I download my results. I put them on the GEDmatch database, and there are 23andMe people there too, so I can start to access more people. There are more tools there. And if I go to GEDmatch, I have to agree to allow law enforcement to see if I'm a match to their killer. I have to opt in, so to speak, to law enforcement. So the only way that law enforcement can even see your DNA is for you to agree to that, to upload it to GEDmatch and agree to allow them to see your results. Now, the other thing is familytree DNA is one of those direct-to-consumer companies. And about a year ago or more, they was discovered that they were cooperating with law enforcement and allowing law enforcement to use their databases. There was a lot of conflict. The genealogists were very upset about that, but they went ahead anyway. And now law enforcement, they've solved cases by using that extra data. So there's good and bad in that. So, but again, familytree won't just pour out the data onto the websites, right? It's internal to their company. And they allow law enforcement, they are opt-in by default. So once you test with them, you have to go through a procedure to get your stuff hidden from law enforcement. And most genealogists don't even go there. So even though they're unhappy, they don't change it.
Oh, interesting. Are there any new technologies that you're experimenting with or ones that show a lot of promise that are coming?
Yeah, we always are. There is, we are looking at more new techniques for degraded DNA. I have some research going in that area because, the whole point in DNA is doing more and more with less and less. So you'll have violent crimes where there's, say, DNA, touch DNA, or there's DNA in a mixture, or DNA that's highly degraded that you would really like to analyze, except you have to develop a new technique for deconvolving the mixture or for using such low-level DNA or for repairing DNA so that you can actually get it to a point you can use it. We're doing that, and John and Jane Doe's, a lot of skeletal remains have very bad DNA associated because of all the environmental insults they've experienced. So part of our research is to do more and more with less and less. We're also doing research on facial reconstruction. We're doing research on a mapping algorithm where you can basically map, all your matches in your database. You can find out where they lived and where they crossed paths and kind of make a map on where you think Mr. X comes from. So we have various areas of research besides just solving cases like we like to do.
Are there any grand challenges you're working on, like finding all the descendants of Jesus, or I don't know, one of these mysteries has been around for hundreds of years, or thousands?
Well, I'm still working on the Abraham Lincoln DNA project off and on, trying to trace it started out as, did he have orphan diseases? Did he have various genetic diseases? And it evolved into trying to trace his genealogy, which is very tricky because his mother died when he was 9. I'm working on that. I work a lot on Holocaust, tracing Holocaust survivors, their families, their parents. And some of those cases I've worked on for a decade or more. And one we're very close. So that's more like conventional genealogy on steroids, because you've got to access. I went to Berlin and Warsaw on one case a couple of years ago. I don't travel a lot, but like I said, I get people to help me. The Holocaust Museum is very good. They've helped me a lot. Local genealogists, say in Warsaw, have helped me get in touch with the various archives and who speak Polish. So I guess in the category of grand challenge, beside all the research, is the Holocaust survivors and finding their families. That's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. For people that want to enter the field, do you have any recommendations on what they should do to prepare themselves or where they can find more info?
Yes, I do. What you need to do, if you want to get into forensic genealogy and do this cool stuff, start on adoption searches. It's called misattributed paternity or non-paternity. Like I said, a person, DNA from a crime scene, you don't know whose it belongs to, but that's just like a John or Jane Doe or an adoptee. They walk into it not really knowing who they are, and they'd like to find their parents. So my suggestion is, there are many adoptees, there are many people online looking for help. Do a bunch of adoption searches. Get the drill. Don't just inhabit Ancestry. Don't get somebody, an adoptee who's been tested at Ancestry. Right now, the Ancestry is so big, I think they have 20 million people in their database, that there's over a 50-50 chance that you'll find somebody close enough that it's kind of easy to find their families. But find a whole bunch of adoption searches, get oiled, and go to GEDmatch. Don't just inhabit Ancestry, where it's a lot easier. Work with people on GEDmatch and learn those tools, learn those tricks, do a bunch of hard cases. That will tell you how to think. Now, when you step into forensic genealogy, say if you're working for me, you basically go undercover because you're not advertising what the case is. You're not saying, hey, the world, GEDmatch here, here's this violent crime, this rape from, Arizona. You don't want to say anything. You have to go into research mode where you can see people, the ones that opt in, but they can't see you. So, you can't reach out to people like you can when you're doing adoption searches. You don't have the big databases you have when you have adoption searches. I've had people work for me who are actually good at it, but they have never used GEDmatch, and so they're very limited. It's harder for them, because they're not used to it. So if you're not good if you don't have the skill in adoption searches, once you start being restricted on who you can reach out to and who you can get to help you, it gets even harder.
What would make a case like incredibly difficult? What are some of the factors?
Well, some of the factors, that's easy. First of all, cases are biased toward Caucasian Europeans because the databases are. That's who does genealogy, and the databases are made from data from genealogists who are doing this. So a Native American or African American case would tend to be a lot harder. Also, it's possible that there are areas of the country that are highly intermarried. It's called endogamy. We had a case from West Virginia, and I can tell you from experience that everyone in West Virginia is related to everyone else in West Virginia. So you don't have this very clean family tree you're building, because every time you find somebody, their mother and father is related 3 times, so you can't, it's very difficult to untangle that kind of stuff, And then also you may have many matches that connect very distantly. And then so you have to work very hard to find out where they overlap, how all these matches come together and make one big family tree, whatever we're doing there. There are new tools developed all the time that help you figure out who's related to whom and where they are on the tree. But these trees can get up to 40,000 people sometimes. The trees, the people in those trees can be highly intermarried. They can be part African American. We have a case that's part California Hispanic, from El Salvador, from Guatemala, part is Texas, and part is French Canadian. So how do you put all that together into one person to identify that one Jane Doe at the end of that? It's complicated.
Yeah, no, that's true. What about the forensic evidence itself? You said from skeletons, it's not easy to get DNA. Where do you get it from? The marrow? Is hair, teeth? I mean, like for cases where someone has passed away, what are some of the things that can be used for data that are worthwhile and difficult versus difficult?
Well, that's a good question. And part of my work is with the International Commission on Missing Persons, who do some extractions for me. You have the bones, and you have certain bone elements that are, more conducive to giving you DNA, like molars, because the enamel in your teeth is the hardest substance in your body. So when you, if you find skeletal remains, the teeth are going to protect the soft tissue more than any other element in your body. So you look for the teeth, you look for incisors, you look for the teeth that have not been compromised. So the soft tissue is probably intact. You can use a petrous bone, which is on the side of your face, but a lot of people don't want to use that because if you want to do a facial reconstruction, you ruin your chance because that bone's going to be gone. The DNA is actually not so much in the marrow, but in the matrix of the bone. The bone is actually really spongy in reality. It hardens as you get older, but still it has a matrix, and the DNA is like kind of hiding in those nooks and crannies in the matrix. So basically you take a bone and you smash it, this machine, you put in a little capsule with a weight, and the machine rocks back and forth and pulverizes the bone into powder. And then you put the powder in certain chemistry. I'm not the one to speak about that. And it causes the bone powder to dissolve and release the DNA. And you can separate the DNA from the rest of the liquid, and there you have it. If the bones are very old or have been out in the weather, DNA will degrade, hot weather, humid weather, so you never know. We've had cases that the remains were only a couple of years old and it was very difficult to get DNA. And then we had one that was 100 years old and it was fine. It was a cave body, a body preserved in a cave over 100 years old. So we thought it was a recent, remains of somebody who died, but it was actually, when we finished it, it was 100 years old. So DNA's
That's really cool.
Yeah, DNA's funny. Now, would you mind if I answered the question again about what makes this difficult?
Yeah, sure. Tell me.
Okay, look, what you do when you get you put your DNA from your Mr. X into the GEDmatch database, let's say. And basically what happens is you see a lot of matches there. And that means people that are related to your Mr. X. And it tells you how much DNA they share with Mr. X as an indication of how closely they are related. You don't know who these people are, but you find out. You use Facebook, you use their email address, their screen name. You figure out who they are. So you have a list of people who are related to your Mr. X, but you don't know how they're related yet. So you build family trees for each one of those people. Let's say the top 20 people. Actually, a GEDmatch list may have 1,000 people on it, but the ones at the top are the real close ones, or the closer ones. So you build these trees out, and suddenly you see that the trees are starting to connect. Because if all these people are related to Mr. X, then some of them, at least some of them, are going to be related to each other. So as you keep building these 20 trees out, they're going to connect. And if you do your job in a simple case, you're going to find that 10 of those connect with each other. There's one group, and 10 others connect with each other, and that's the second group. But the two groups don't connect to each other. And what you have in front of you is the family tree for mom and the family tree for dad, the parent, assuming the parents are not related. So you wind up taking the 20, simple example, and connecting these people and coming up. Once you have the two groups, you find somebody from one group who married somebody from the other group, and one of their children will be who you're looking for because that person's connected to all the matches on both groups. So what can make it more difficult is the following. First of all, very first, if dad had a baby out of wedlock who's not in the genealogy, he never said anything, he had a child out of wedlock. So when we connect and connect the two groups and we see the children in front of us, we can account for all the children and the killer isn't there. So
how often is there an embarrassing, oops, or I didn't know, a kid out of wedlock? How often does that happen?
More than we like, a few % of the time. I had one where there was an oops, and then dad was also an oops. So
did he know?
Well, we don't know because I think they were both deceased. But anyway, it was solved because there was adoption records and there was all kinds. But so first of all, you may see all the kids, but the person you're looking for is not there. So he was an oops. All right. So that's the first complication. And another one is if mom and dad are related, because then you don't have these two separate groups, that you can find mom, married dad, and there's the connection. It could be it's just one group. And, that would be like if the guy's from West Virginia and both the parents are related to each other. So that's another complication, right?
Is there software where, let's say you get, 1,000 matches in GED, as you were saying. Mm-hmm. Is there software now that looks at the degree of similarity between all of them to help you expedite creating trees and associations?
Yeah.
Or, could you make software like that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of tools on GEDmatch. For example, there's a tool called Are Your Parents Related? So what that does is it looks for DNA. You have 2 chromosomes in each pair. One's from mom, one's from dad. So it looks for DNA that's common between those 2 chromosomes, which means you got the same DNA from mom as you got from dad, and therefore mom and dad are related. So it says, are your parents related? And this, and you hope the answer is no. But that helps you say, because we had that case from West Virginia, are your parents related? We knew the gal was from West Virginia because all of her matches were from West Virginia, and yet her parents were not related. So that was really interesting, and I predicted one of her parents is from somewhere else. And I was right, because what happened in that case, we didn't use 20 matches, we used almost 200. And they were all related to her mother's side from West Virginia, except for maybe 1 or 2 distant ones. Her mother was from West Virginia, her father was from Germany. So he basically had nobody in the database. He had no real relatives. He was from another country. So, so that tool, though, Are Your Parents Related, helped us know that what we were seeing was probably one parent and not the other. There are other tools that are triangulation tools so that Mr. X, let's say Mr. X has John Smith and Jane Jones on the list. You have a tool that can see if John and Jane are related, because if they are not, they may be on different branches of the family, right? And if they are, they're on the same branch. So that's a very coarse type statement helping you sort out those two groups I described earlier for mom's side and dad's side. So there are plenty of tools, and we're still, like, I'm working on a mapping routine that if I took those 20 family trees and I threw them on Google Earth, where do those people overlap geographically? You know, John Smith has 10 branches to his family. Jane Jones has 10 branches. You know, maybe they, overlap somewhere. And then if I look on a map, I can say, oh, John Smith had relatives in Detroit in the 1930s, and so did Jane Jones. Okay, so let me look in that area in their family trees to see where they overlap. Maybe that's where they kind of connect. So,
that's pretty cool.
There's all kinds of tools out there.
Have you researched your own family like crazy, or are you like the cobbler talking about no shoes and you don't care?
No, that's why I do all this, because I pretty much got to the bottom of my research. A cousin just really sent me a whole bunch of new stuff for the first time in about 25 years, because I hadn't gone back recently and looked at the old newspapers, and it turned out there were a few articles about relatives of mine that were very interesting that I hadn't thought to go back because I got tired of looking. And he found some Civil War records. He was very clever about that, and that answered a couple of other mystery questions. But I pretty much have it. The only problem is the branch of my family from Ireland probably will be forever a mystery, because I've been to Ireland 10 times. I pretty much cleaned out the country of anything I'm going to find. And, even my brother doesn't match any other Fitzpatrick. So, I knew they were from outer space. I knew it. And there you got proof, there's really, that will be forever a mystery, I think. I don't think I ever he could have changed his name or something. I don't know what's going on. But so I have researched like crazy. There are some mysteries I think I will never solve.
Yeah. Is there anyone that you've ever looked at that appears to have like no connections to anybody? They're like this, I don't know, they just seem to come out of nowhere, genealogically?
I said, right now I'm working on a case where all the matches go to colonial Virginia. There's, like I said, the two groups and the connecting, the 20 tops, and you try and see how they overlap to try and eventually get to your Mr. X. All those connections are in colonial Virginia. So I don't know what this guy's doing. It seems like genealogy is so popular. I mean, the guy's Caucasian European, that's all true. But how come he doesn't have any relatives closer than that? I don't know why he's like, it's a vacuum. If you took the test, if I took the test, any ordinary American walking down the street, you're going to find matches, we call them DNA cousins, that are certainly closer somewhere than colonial Virginia. But this guy, I don't know. He could be from another planet. I don't know. And I had another case where the guy was from Yemen. We know for many reasons why he was from Yemen. And, you do it, I do it. I'll have a couple of thousand matches on GEDmatch. This guy had like 10, and they were all eighth cousins, just because there's no Yemenis, people from Yemen in the database. So can't say he's from outer space, but almost.
I guess if you got someone's DNA that was like in the Yanomami or something, like in the rainforest, they would probably have zero matches.
Yes, you may. Yeah, that's the problem. You're catching on that it's as good as the database you have to work with.
Makes sense. Okay.
Right. So, if you're Native American, you're not going to find a whole lot of. If you're from Yemen, you're not going to find a whole lot of. If you're from the rainforest of Africa or South America, you're not going to find a whole lot of matches in there.
So the last question, what do you see as the future of your work, over the next 10 years, maybe longer? What's new that's coming that's interesting?
I think that we're going to see, more and more with less and less. I think we're going to solve a lot of cases that we thought were beyond modern technology. And it's going to be more cohesive with the rest of the forensic endeavors. I think people are going to realize this is not a magic cure for the common cold case. It's not something you do after the next commercial. You don't, and that in spite of all the, oh my God, I call it the oh my God era. I think that the oh my God era is fading, and people are really, the agencies I work with are having more of a practical type look at how this really works. And, they are forming their own forensic genetic genealogy units. The detectives are learning how to do this. And so I think it's going to be like a very more coordinated, more sane, more practical tool than it is regarded as right now. I think more tools like the mapping, I say, will be pulled in, the better facial reconstruction, more work with degraded DNA, low-level DNA, touch DNA, mixtures. Mixtures can be hard to separate. If you have a sexual assault, you'll have female and male DNA mixed together for obvious reasons, and it's a trick to separate them. I think there'll be more research on that using genetic genealogy. That's already starting to be done. So I think that there's going to be really some very interesting things coming along, more genealogy tools. I think it's going to be fascinating what we will be able to do that we can't do today.
Well, very good. Well, Colleen, it's been really cool to talk to you. You're doing interesting stuff, and I appreciate you being here.
Listen, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. You've asked some very interesting and good questions that need to be asked.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and for people that want to contact you about your services, where can they go?
They can contact me. My website, which needs to be updated, by the way, is identifinders.com. IDENTIFINDERS. That's Identifinders. You can also Gmail me at cfitzp0425@gmail. I have a blog, identifinders.wordpress.com. I'm on Facebook, Forensic Genealogy Facebook page. So I'm out there. You can Google my name. You can find me. I'll be glad to, help where I can.
Very good.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.